In March 2024, the prestigious Whitmore and Associates auction house in Boston received an extraordinary collection of Victorian-era photographs from the estate of Margaret Ashford Hamilton, the final heir of one of Boston's most storied banking dynasties. Hidden among the dozens of sepia-toned images was a seemingly ordinary family portrait taken in 1902, a photograph that would soon ignite a deeply unsettling historical mystery. Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned photography authenticator who had spent her career studying American portraiture from the turn of the century, was hired to evaluate the collection for insurance purposes. At first glance, the Ashford family portrait appeared conventional, an expected product of Edwardian formal photography. It depicted patriarch William Ashford, his refined wife Catherine, and their 19-year-old daughter Eleanor, posed in the lavish parlor of their Beacon Hill mansion. The arrangement followed the traditional triangular composition favored at the time, with ornate furnishings and patterned wallpaper framing the figures. Eleanor, seated delicately between her parents, wore an exquisite white silk gown embroidered with fine beadwork, suggesting that the photograph commemorated a significant event, most likely her recent engagement to Charles Morrison, heir to a powerful railroad fortune. Yet as Chen examined the print under routine magnification, something caused her breath to falter. Eleanor's left hand, placed gently against her dress, appeared disturbingly unnatural. In contrast to the healthy flush of her face and the natural tone of her right hand, the left appeared rigid, starkly pale, and almost porcelain in its lifelessness. Its stiffness betrayed an unnatural quality, a detail subtle but inescapable to Chen's practiced eye. After 3 decades of studying historic photographs, she had never encountered an anomaly quite like this. Further scrutiny only deepened her unease. Eleanor's left hand not only lacked the warm gradations of shadow and highlight that should have been produced by the studio's controlled lighting, but seemed almost immune to the natural fall of light entirely. The portrait had been crafted by the Harrison Brothers Studio, one of Boston's most respected photography houses, in 1902, known for their mastery of large-format cameras and their reputation for flawless consistency. Records preserved in the Boston Public Library confirmed their use of professional-grade lighting that yielded uniform high-quality results. Yet in this portrait, one hand defied all photographic logic, raising questions that no technical explanation could neatly resolve. Spectroscopic analysis confirmed beyond doubt that the Ashford family portrait was genuine. The paper fiber's chemical composition and patterns of aging were all perfectly consistent with silver gelatin processing techniques from 1902. There were no traces of retouching, composite layering, or manipulation of any kind that could account for the unsettling appearance of Eleanor's left hand. Under the scrutiny of high-powered magnification, the authenticity became even clearer. Every element of the image retained its expected sharpness and tonal accuracy. William Ashford's clasped hands behind his back displayed the natural variation of color and texture one would anticipate. Catherine's neatly folded hands in her lap showed the proper play of shadow and light. Even Eleanor's right hand, relaxed at her side, looked entirely natural, with healthy gradations of tone and form. Only the left hand remained disturbingly unnatural. To ensure that nothing had been overlooked, Chen enlisted the expertise of Harvard's Visual Arts Department. Dr. Michael Stevens, an authority on early 20th century portrait techniques, conducted a meticulous 2-week examination. His findings were as unsettling as they were conclusive. The photograph bore no flaws, no inconsistencies, in lighting, no technical missteps. Every part of the image aligned with what one would expect from the finest studio work of its era. The anomaly of Eleanor's hand, he declared, could not be explained by any known photographic method or limitation of 1902. It was not a product of equipment failure, nor was it a flaw in exposure or development. The mystery deepened when Chen unearthed the photographer's original session notes in the Harrison Brothers studio archives. The portrait had been scheduled for April 15, 1902, yet the records revealed a peculiar delay. The session had not been completed until 3 weeks later. That discrepancy, seemingly minor, took on a darker significance in light of Eleanor's haunting appearance. Further research into the Ashford family revealed a dynasty of immense power and carefully concealed complexities. William Ashford had risen during the Gilded Age, amassing a fortune through banking and establishing the Ashford Trust Company in 1885. By the dawn of the 20th century, the family stood among Boston's most elite, linked by business and bloodline to the city's ruling circles. Catherine Morrison Ashford, William's wife, came from equally formidable lineage. Her father's wealth, built on railroad construction, had secured her place among Boston's most envied debutantes. Their 1880 marriage was heralded as the union of two financial empires, cementing influence that spanned both banking and railroads. Eleanor Ashford, born in 1883, was their sole surviving child, the fragile heir to an empire of privilege, expectation, and secrecy. The society pages of the Boston Globe praised Eleanor Ashford as one of the city's most accomplished young women of her generation. Admired for her skill at the piano and her tireless philanthropic work on behalf of Boston's orphanages. Her engagement to Charles Morrison Jr., announced in early 1902, was celebrated as the pinnacle of the social season, hailed as both a romance and an alliance between two of the most powerful families in New England. Yet beneath the glittering announcements and flattering prose, genealogical research uncovered hospital records that painted a far more troubling picture of Eleanor's condition during the very months leading up to the famous portrait. Massachusetts General Hospital admission logs revealed that Eleanor had been placed under the care of Dr. Jonathan Whitfield in March 1902 for what was then termed a severe nervous disorder. She remained hospitalized for 3 weeks, a detail that corresponded precisely with the delay in the Harrison Brothers portrait session. The timing was more than coincidental. Dr. Whitfield's private notes, later unearthed in the archives of Harvard Medical School, described a disturbing series of symptoms, prolonged episodes of cataleptic rigidity, unpredictable paralysis, and intermittent loss of sensation in her limbs. His final observation was especially unsettling. Eleanor had been discharged against his medical advice with her family, insistent that she return to society obligations despite her ongoing fragility. The Ashford-Morrison engagement was not merely a matter of affection. It was a carefully arranged union of dynasties. Charles Morrison Sr. wielded enormous influence through his control of New England's railroad network, while William Ashford's banking empire underpinned industrial growth across the region. Together, their children's marriage would consolidate power and wealth on a scale few could rival. That urgency explained the peculiar speed with which the engagement was announced in February 1902, surprising Boston's elite who had expected a leisurely courtship. Wedding plans advanced with similar haste, setting the ceremony for June, barely 2 months after the portrait session. Yet private letters preserved in the Morrison family collection at the Boston Historical Society reveal a troubling shift in Charles Jr.'s perception of his fiancée. Early correspondence brimmed with enthusiasm and tenderness. But following Eleanor's hospitalization, his tone darkened. In a letter dated April 10, 1902, to a Harvard classmate, Charles confided, "Eleanor has been unwell of late, and I fear the preparations have taxed her beyond her strength. She seems withdrawn and at times cold to the touch, especially her hands. My mother urges delay, but father insists the business arrangements leave no room for hesitation." The words reflected not only his concern for Eleanor's declining health, but also the relentless pressure of family ambition that overshadowed her personal well-being. Even more revealing than Charles Morrison Jr.'s earlier doubts was a letter he wrote to his sister on April 28, 1902. In it, he confessed, "I visited Eleanor yesterday, and something seems terribly wrong. During our entire time together, she scarcely moved her left hand, and when I held it, the sensation chilled me. It was cold as marble." When I mentioned this to Mrs. Ashford, she grew visibly agitated and insisted Eleanor was only nervous about the upcoming wedding. His words conveyed not only a fiancé's concern, but also the rising tension between private alarm and public appearances. Charles's correspondence painted a clear picture of mounting unease. While his affection for Eleanor remained, the constant pressure from both the Ashford and Morrison families to continue with the marriage despite her declining health weighed heavily on him. It was becoming evident that the union was no longer simply about love, but about duty to dynastic ambition. Dr. Jonathan Whitfield's medical records provided the most comprehensive glimpse into Eleanor's struggles during that pivotal spring. Renowned in Boston as the foremost specialist in neurological disorders, particularly those affecting young women of the upper classes, Whitfield documented the case with meticulous detail. His initial examination notes described a troubling pattern episodes of muscular rigidity, most prominently affecting the left side of Eleanor's body. What had begun as mild stiffness in late 1901 had escalated alarmingly by the first months of 1902. She reported episodes in which her left hand would become completely numb, unresponsive, and immobile for hours at a time. Publicly, Whitfield diagnosed what was then termed hysterical paralysis, a condition often ascribed to emotional strain or social pressures in young women. Privately, however, his writings revealed deep reservations. While the patient's symptoms align with traditional descriptions of hysteria, he noted the consistent localization to the left extremities and the intensity of the cataleptic episodes point toward a far more serious neurological disorder. Such words underscored his suspicion that Eleanor's ailment was not psychological, but physical and potentially progressive. Her treatments reflected the standard medical approaches of 1902. She underwent electrical stimulation therapy, hydrotherapeutic cold water immersions, and extended periods of prescribed rest. None provided lasting relief. What alarmed Whitfield most was the trajectory of her illness. On March 30th, 1902, he recorded, "Episodes of rigidity are becoming more frequent and prolonged. Most disturbing is the complete absence of sensation and circulation in the affected limb during attacks. The hand becomes pale cold and waxen, more akin to lifeless sculpture than flesh." His final recommendation was drastic Eleanor should be admitted for extended treatment and possibly enrolled in experimental therapies, then being developed at Johns Hopkins University. But the Ashford family rejected his counsel outright. With Eleanor's June wedding looming, her parents insisted that her presence at social functions could not be compromised by an extended hospital stay. Against his better judgment, Whitfield reluctantly discharged her into the family's care, providing careful instructions for monitoring and an urgent warning that she must return if symptoms worsened. Meanwhile, the Harrison Brothers Studio, Boston's most celebrated portrait photographers since 1890, was preparing for the Ashford Commission. Known for serving the city's wealthiest families, they prided themselves on flawless technique and impeccable presentation. It was under these circumstances, against a backdrop of secrecy, declining health, and relentless social pressure, that Eleanor would sit for the now infamous portrait. The Harrison Brothers studio business records, preserved with remarkable precision, offered a rare window into the exact circumstances of the Ashford family portrait session. The original appointment scheduled for April 15, 1902, was abruptly postponed at the family's request, citing Miss Eleanor's poor health. 2 subsequent sittings were also cancelled before the portrait was finally completed on May 6, 1902. James Harrison, the studio's senior photographer, left unusually detailed notes that revealed just how difficult the session had been. The Ashfords arrived on time impeccably dressed, but Eleanor appeared frail and required frequent breaks to rest. She struggled to position her left hand and made a peculiar request that it remain in a fixed pose for the entirety of the sitting. Harrison's technical notes recounted how the process demanded several exposures, as Eleanor often could not maintain her posture. Each time her left hand was involved, she seemed in visible discomfort arranging it with great care and then refusing to move it as though any shift might cause pain. What troubled Harrison most, however, was the baffling issue of lighting. His notes record: "Despite our standard setup, Miss Ashford's left hand appeared unnaturally pale in the viewfinder. We adjusted lamps and reflectors multiple times, but the effect persisted. Against her dress, the hand seemed almost luminous." He ultimately attributed this effect to her illness and the natural pallor of her skin, but his final remark was chillingly prescient. The resulting portrait captures the family as requested, though I fear future viewers may find Miss Ashford's appearance disquieting. The contrast between her animated face and the lifeless quality of her left hand creates an unfortunate impression. Despite the Ashfords' insistence that the wedding would proceed, events soon overtook their resolve. Though society columns delicately announced the June 15, 1902 ceremony had been postponed due to Eleanor's continued delicate health, private letters revealed the truth. In a letter to a confidant dated June 10th, Charles Morrison Jr. confessed, "I cannot in good conscience proceed with the marriage. Eleanor's decline since our engagement portrait has been grievous. She suffers spells during which her entire left side stiffens and loses all sensation. Yesterday, her hand lay motionless for over an hour, and she seemed wholly unaware of my touch." The tragedy deepened just days later. Hospital records confirmed that on June 12, 1902, 3 days before her wedding, Eleanor was readmitted to Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Whitfield's notes from this final admission paint a harrowing picture of her condition, one that left little hope for recovery. By the summer of 1902, Eleanor Ashford's decline could no longer be disguised. Dr. Whitfield's final hospital notes recorded with clinical precision the rapid advancement of her illness. Patient's condition has advanced considerably. Cataleptic episodes now affect her entire left side and occur multiple times daily. Left hand remains pale and cold, even between episodes. Prognosis is poor. His words mark the point at which the Ashford family's carefully managed secrecy unraveled. The Morrison family's reaction to the collapse of the wedding was immediate and pragmatic. Charles Morrison Sr., who had tied significant business ventures to the anticipated marriage, moved swiftly to dissolve the pending stock transfers, property agreements, and joint ventures that the alliance had been designed to secure. Financial records revealed that both families suffered substantial losses as the arrangements were unwound. Though the blow fell hardest on the Ashfords, whose banking empire had been counting on the consolidation. Boston society, meanwhile, responded with a mixture of sympathy and speculation. Columnist Margaret Thornton, writing in the Boston Herald, captured the city's tone. "The postponement of the Morrison-Ashford wedding has occasioned much comment in our circles. While official statements attribute the matter to Miss Ashford's delicate health, those who have observed her at recent gatherings cannot have failed to notice her pallor and subdued demeanor." Behind such polite phrasing lay an undercurrent of rumor that only intensified as Eleanor withdrew completely from public life. By late summer, the Ashford family had become increasingly reclusive, their Beacon Hill mansion shuttered to visitors, their social calendar abandoned. The turning point came with Whitfield's consultation with specialists at Johns Hopkins University. Among them was Dr. Harrison Matthews, a rising authority in neurological disorders whose correspondence finally provided a diagnosis that explained both Eleanor's mysterious symptoms and the haunting peculiarity of the family portrait. She was suffering from a rare condition later identified as focal dystonia, a progressive neurological disorder that in her case localized to the left side of her body. In 1902, medical science lacked both the terminology and the treatment to combat it. Matthews described the condition in chilling detail. The patient presents with a progressive neurological disorder characterized by involuntary muscle contractions and the gradual loss of motor function. The affected limbs become rigid and lose circulation, producing the pale and cold quality observed. His prognosis was stark. There was no cure, only limited palliative measures, and her quality of life would inevitably deteriorate as the condition advanced to other parts of her body. This diagnosis provided the long-sought explanation for the strange anomaly in the Harrison brothers' portrait. On the day of the sitting, Eleanor had been in the grip of one of her episodes. Her left hand, locked by rigidity and deprived of blood flow, appeared unnaturally pale and lifeless, almost as if carved from wax. The photograph had captured not a technical flaw, but the precise, chilling reality of her illness. Dr. Whitfield's private writings reveal his deep frustration and sorrow. Had the family accepted my recommendations for immediate specialized care in March, he lamented we might have been able to slow the progression of Miss Ashford's condition. Instead, parental ambition and social pressure had prevailed, sealing Eleanor's fate and leaving the family portrait as both a record of Boston's gilded society and a haunting testament to one young woman's suffering. The Ashfords' determination to preserve appearances may have cost Eleanor her only real chance at treatment. The portrait that was meant to commemorate her engagement and mark her ascendance into Boston's highest social circles instead became the first visible record of her tragic decline. Her condition worsened steadily throughout 1902, and by Christmas, doctors' notes confirmed that the paralysis and rigidity had spread across her entire left side, with early symptoms now appearing in her right hand as well. The family's response was to vanish from public life. In early 1903, they sold their Beacon Hill mansion under the pretense of William Ashford's retirement from banking, retreating instead to a secluded estate in western Massachusetts. The true purpose was clear: to shield Eleanor from the prying eyes of society and to provide her with the privacy and constant care her illness demanded. Nursing records from the Massachusetts State Archives reveal the extent of her struggle in these final years. Eleanor required near total assistance with daily tasks, and though she experienced brief intervals of relative stability, such moments became increasingly rare as her condition advanced. Perhaps most poignant were Eleanor's own words, preserved in a diary found among the family papers. In an entry dated February 1903, she confessed, "My hand looks as though it belongs to a statue rather than to a living person. When I look upon our family portrait, I remember how desperately I tried to conceal my affliction during the session. Now I understand how plain it must have been to anyone who looked closely." Her writings captured not only her physical suffering, but also her acute awareness of the image that had forever recorded her struggle. Despite the broken engagement, Charles Morrison Jr. continued to visit Eleanor throughout her illness. His private letters describe these visits as both tender and agonizing. "Her mind remains sharp and her spirit unbroken," he wrote. "But her body betrays her more each day. She often laughs that she might have made a fine marble sculptor, for she has become quite expert at keeping perfectly still." His devotion underscored the affection that had once promised a different future for them both. On November 18, 1905, Eleanor Ashford's brief and sorrowful life came to an end at the age of 22. Her death certificate recorded the cause as complications of a progressive neurological disorder. But for those who had known her, she was remembered as the radiant young woman who had once been the pride of Boston society. Her fate forever immortalized in a haunting family portrait that bore witness to both her beauty and her suffering. Eleanor Ashford was laid to rest in a small private ceremony, attended only by her immediate family. Her passing marking the end of a life that had once promised so much, but was tragically cut short. The Ashford family portrait, once celebrated as a display of wealth, refinement, and social standing, came to hold a far different meaning in the decades that followed. What had begun as a conventional engagement portrait evolved into a medical and historical artifact of extraordinary value. Modern neurologists who have studied the photograph alongside her surviving medical records agree that Eleanor almost certainly suffered from focal dystonia, compounded by secondary circulatory complications, a diagnosis that would explain both her symptoms and the uncanny appearance of her hand. In 2004, Dr. Rebecca Chen of Massachusetts General Hospital's Neurology Department reflected on the case, noting, "This photograph provides remarkable visual documentation of a neurological condition as it was manifesting in real time. Eleanor's pale, rigid hand demonstrates precisely the signs we would expect to see during a dystonic episode complicated by vascular impairment." Her words underscored how the image, once puzzling now, offered rare clinical evidence of a disorder that was poorly understood at the time. The portrait stands as a vivid reminder of how little could be done for patients in the early 20th century. Conditions that modern medicine can now manage with targeted therapies, medications, and rehabilitative strategies were for Eleanor a near certain death sentence. The Ashfords' decision to maintain appearances, pressing forward with social obligations, a public engagement, and a family portrait session, reflects the immense pressures of the Gilded Age elite for whom reputation often outweighed private suffering. Yet that very determination inadvertently preserved an invaluable record, capturing both the grace of a young woman and the stark reality of her decline. Today, the Ashford family portrait is housed in Harvard Medical School's historical collection, where it serves dual purposes as a teaching tool for students learning to recognize neurological disorders and as a memorial to Eleanor herself. The photograph that once unsettled viewers with its peculiar detail has become a testament to resilience, documenting a young woman's courage in the face of an incurable illness and a family's attempt to preserve her dignity in a world that had no cure to offer. Eleanor's story elevates the portrait from mere curiosity to a profoundly human document, one that speaks across centuries about illness, love, and the fragile balance between social image and private reality.